It is the Rotoballer PGA Show 4, the 2024 Paris Olympics, folks. We are speaking about the Olympics. Spencer, this is the first time as a golf content creator, that I have got the opportunity to do content about the Olympics, dude. That is so cool. I'm so blessed. I'm so lucky. I'm so thankful for it. How are you on the week of 2024 Paris Olympics?
I'm doing well. I see you're repping your country there. I'm repping Penny Hardaway, USA, 1996 team there. So I'm excited to do this show. I've talked about this a little bit already, whether it's inside my DraftKings article or even on Twitter. I tend to actually think that this is a good betting board. I think it's a great DFS slate for this being a limited field, no cut sort of contest. Ownership's going to gravitate to all the same areas this week. I don't necessarily have the same viewpoint as the public from what I have seen from early ownership. So when you get differing takes on it, it definitely creates the potential, at least, for a big week to be had. It doesn't mean that the pieces get put together. If the chalk comes in the spots where you don't have it, there's a different story to be had. But excited to do this with you today, Byron.
Yes, dude. It's good to, I miss you, man. I was speaking to Kenny earlier. I was like a little rusty to start off the show. So I've done that one. So I should be kind of hitting my stride, but 7 days on the bicycle through the cornfields of Iowa's got me like kind of forgetting about golf a little bit. We're chatting about it before the show started, and it's kind of nice to kind of just get recharged a bit. And it's just been fun. And now watching the guys bike in the Olympics and all that stuff, I'm like, ooh, that's where we want to go. But we'll be chatting some Olympics random stuff at the end of the show and going from there. We're going to chat some DFS. I know you just did the show with Joe Idoni on Preferred Lines and chatting mostly bets and outrights over there. So you guys can go and get all Spencer and Joe's insights about the outrights and things like that. We're going to be kind of focusing on this week's DFS, which I think is, like you said, a fun week to go with that. So we kind of discussed the course with Joe as well, so we can kind of brush over some key topics, some high-level stuff, but nothing too crazy. So Spence, what would you say is, just some high takeaways, just some go ahead and just summarize what you did on Joe's show.
So I think you're going to get very similar answers across the board. There seems to be this differing take of how impactful the rough is going to be. That's maybe the one change that's come into play today, just with some answers given from Scotty Scheffler, that this rough is not like how it was at the Ryder Cup. Look, I would never expect it to be like it was at the Ryder Cup. That
was cabbage.
Ryder Cups are meant to be as pushed in one direction for a team as possible. You put it on U.S. soil, wide open, let's bomb and gouge away. You put it on European soil, you're going to have the ultimate answer of a club down course. This is still a club down course at the end of the day for me. It's a plotter's paradise. There's a lot of water that comes into play. And if you miss poorly enough with some of those drives, you're still going to have the ability to find rough there. So I don't want any of these answers from Scotty or Tom Kim or whoever's given these answers so far to take away from the difficulty of this course. At its best, if you are able to put the pieces together, there are low numbers to be had. At its worst, if you're forcing things too heavily, there are some big numbers that can come into play. I talked about this with Joe when we did Preferred Lines. One of the most unique outlooks for this tournament above anything else is on a normal PGA Tour event, you're playing for cash. You're playing for purses. If you're not first, second, or third here, you're getting nothing. So it's a volatile venue at the end of the day where there is still a need, if you find yourself a little bit off the pace, to be more aggressive than you normally would in these spots. I think big numbers can be found in those situations. So, I don't know what that's going to do from an in-tournament betting perspective. I think for any of these round-specific DFS contests, there's a really fun game to be had if we can figure out what the correct answer is for that. And we don't have past examples to build from, but sometimes when you have no information, and, Byron, you and I are two people that we want as much data as possible to pull from, but with the industry getting sharper as a whole, sometimes having no information and being able to extrapolate out and project out some of the data is also equally as important. That to me is more of a DFS answer because that boom or bust nature plays a lot better than in matchups. Like matchups, I want safety. I don't want those boom or bust answers. So there's a little bit of a downside there, but I think this is a really great DFS week.
It's going to be fun, dude. It's the Olympics, like you said. It's all my outrights were bet with 3 places because there's no dead heats on those, because you will find a first, second, and third finite set of people. And I think that's a fun way to kind of bet the outrights as well. And it's interesting to see how these guys go about it, because even though someone got out-dueled by a second place dude to kind of miss out on silver, you're still getting your bronze and it's still representing your country and adding to the total there for the Olympics, which is so different to everything that is done from golf side of things. Liv's trying to replicate this stuff with the team events, but that's every week, and it's, kind of weird in a way that, we've all spoken about, but the Olympics is the shit, dude. I'm like so excited for this week. So let's get right into it, man. Scotty Scheffler, Spencer, right off the top rope. What sport, I know we said we are going to do this at the end. What sport currently taking place at the Summer Olympics would Scotty Scheffler best be in?
Probably not something where you have to drive. I don't know if there's I don't want him in a canoe or anything like that.
Or a vehicle. I guess there's no. Yeah.
If you have an answer, give me your answer, Fred. I'm looking through the sports right now to figure out where I think.
I'm going to go with table tennis.
I'm going to give you an answer in this. I'm going to go with archery. He is so precise with what he does with his iron play and his play around or off the tee. So I think a sport like that where you need to be super precise, Scotty Scheffler would be good.
What do you think his feet? Can you move your feet in archery? That's the biggest question I have.
I mean, you're not supposed to move your feet the way that he does in golf, and he gets away with it. So I think the guy can get away with it in any sport.
I love it. Ed telling us diving. Hey, maybe, I don't know. We'll kind of go through it here. We've got a list of stuff. As we go through each guy, maybe we'll just pull up a name and see what we think is best, because it's the Olympics. Let's make the show a little more fun than normal and go from there. So Scotty Spence, he's 12.5. Freaking expensive this week, dude. Any lineup you build with Scotty is going to look nastier than the 3M leaderboard last week. What are we doing with Scotty Scheffler at 12.5?
Here's my concern with Scotty beyond every reason that you just gave. Some of the putting statistics do have massive red flags for me. I've made this argument a lot this year, and I don't know where Xander's at with his game after his Open Championship victory. I don't know how often he's picked up a club. I don't know how much he's playing. That's an answer that only he would know at this point right now. I tend to go in the direction that I want to aggressively. Oh, that's actually a
great answer.
That's probably the correct answer. He can definitely play from what I've seen.
Yeah, he's a great basketball player. For those that are listening. Scotty Scheffler.
That's a great answer. That's the correct answer, unfortunately, at the end of the day.
I think it is.
I guess for me, I found myself in a way, and I guess we'll talk about this with Scotty, Xander, and Rahm.
Cool.
There are, any way that you build a model, Scotty and Xander are going to push themselves heavily across. I mean, at least if you're building a proper model than most of these other names. Rahm is the one for me that, depending on exactly how I build this, I can get him into a very similar range as those two names. And I gave this answer with Joe Idoni just 25 minutes ago, essentially. I run things from a longer term duration than most people. When I do that, it still puts me in this weird spot because that longer term duration is now starting to become almost solely what this season is, just the way that the numbers end up building there. So I don't have a ton of Jon Rahm information at my disposal. And a lot of the information that I have at my disposal features some of the low-end stuff that he was producing there for a second. And the live numbers that, frankly, I don't put a ton into play with it, but some live numbers that I don't love within my model. At Jon Rahm's very best, he is one of the premier, if not the most premier total drivers of the ball. Inside of my model, he is 37th out of 60 players. If I ran things either from his prime, like take this back a year and run it just like the prime version from that year before to a year ago, he jumps inside the top 3 for me. Run it over the last little bit, he jumps inside the top 5. That little shift makes me believe that Jon Rahm is starting to get his game back. I don't know where the ownership is going to land with the top 2. I agree with you that people are going to see that price tag. And look, I mean, it's Scotty Scheffler. We know the form. We know everything that he's going to produce. But I guess the only argument that I'm trying to make here is I do believe Jon Rahm is a lot closer at a cheaper price tag than Scotty than the general public is going to believe this week.
Yeah. I do think after the live win, that's going to drive a bit of love towards him.
Unfortunately.
But let's chat about Jon Rahm's Olympic caliber. What sport would Jon Rahm, Spencer, be the best in the Summer Olympics of 2024?
He has a lot of lower body strength. I'm going to say judo.
Judo. Yes, dude. I love that for Jon Rahm. I want to say, oh boy. I want to say boxing.
Yeah, like wrestling, boxing, somewhere in that caliber is probably like the ultimate way.
I'm trying to find powerlifting, and I don't think I see it yet, but I'd say that would be probably his next best. Like, you know, like the deadlift, like what you call those things, those where they put it above their shoulders and then like put it in the air kind of thing. I think that would be a Jon Rahm situation. Even with his club foot, I think you'd still manage to just thrust that thing into the air like he does with his grumpy, morbid body. But
you have to bring up Ed's comment.
So for those listening, Ed suggests Jon Rahm would be the best at hot dog eating. So we'll have to petition to get that into the 2028 Summer Olympics out in LA. Joey Chestnut would obviously be right in there with him. But yeah, I think, you know, the guy's the guy. T-Dax saying judo makes tons of sense. He looks like he would have had a hip toss to a yes. You know, we've got this all. So Spence, I'm with you. The thing with Jon Rahm is just, it's so, I don't know. You know, like we've seen 3 really bad majors. I was on a bike during the middle of the Open Championship. What did he get up to? Do you remember? Like roughly, was he top 10, top 20 at the Open?
He was top 10 and he was on the wrong wave.
Oh, wow.
Which is
so he's really starting to play some good golf then.
Yeah, that was one of the, I have run very preliminary numbers right now for ownership. I don't trust this until Tuesday morning. And in reality, I don't trust it till Tuesday afternoon until I pull in the 5 sites that I'm aggregating from within my model. I'm pulling from essentially 1.5 right now. And one of them that I'm pulling from is the least one that I trust of the entire mix. We'll keep it nameless for this example here. But Rahm for me, and whether this ends up being right, is about like, I think Scotty, Xander, Morikawa are all going to be more popular than him. I don't know where Rory and him land. I don't know where Oberg is going to necessarily land. Maybe I'm wrong on those projections, but I still feel like at the end of the day, people are going to find themselves in a spot where they're going to talk themselves into Colin at 10,200 because of his total driving ability at a course like this. That is, everybody's going to talk about club down, and you're going to think Colin Morikawa. I also think a lot of people are going to try to find a way to get up to Scotty. Like, we don't really land into any contest to where he's lower than 30%.
Spence, I'm thinking in this week he's going to be sub 20, man, especially with Xander having done what he's been doing. I feel like you can call it 1A, 1B, and if you're getting $900 cheaper on Xander, I think,
maybe,
you know, why would people not just play that guy instead, you know?
Regardless of the point, like, let's even just say you're correct on that because there's a possibility. It goes to the same point, though. Like, I still think both of those 2 guys are more popular than Jon Rahm is kind of where I'm going there. So we can split this however we want with ownership, but I kind of think he lands, I don't know if necessarily the lowest of the 10,000 options because of that live victory, but he's burned people this year. I also just don't know if we're going to get a version of him that's going to look like it's higher than 16, 17%, which is low in a 60-man field.
Who are we speaking about now? Jon Rahm?
Jon Rahm.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we were jumping around just a touch there. But yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, the ownership has to go somewhere, right? And we've got, especially at the top, you can't play everyone in this 10K range. We've got 6 guys in the 10K. And this is not a $5,000 range contest this week. We've got 6K floor. So it's going to be really interesting to see what cooks there. So it sounds like you're kind of out on Rory this week. I think a lot of people will be. He's going to likely be the ugly duckling this week, I think. And he doesn't necessarily know what the heck country he even wants to play for in the Olympics. So never mind if he wants to be married or not. Never mind if he wants to see the press or not. Now he doesn't even know what country he wants to play for. I think this is probably the most confused he's ever going to step on a golf course in his career.
I don't want to like talk anybody out of anybody in this range. There's 6 players, $10,000 and up Those are 6 of my 7 win equity candidates. The top of the board is very sound the way it is. I tend to agree with you that Rory will be the overlooked commodity of the mix. I don't think it's going to be substantially so compared to Rahm, where I would rather play Rahm, but I don't want to take the stance at the very top of this board that without at least knowing where ownership lands, that I am technically out on any of these players. Like, let's see where ownership is and go from there.
Okay. I was about to ask you next, since we've got 6 guys in the 10K range, how are you approaching them? But I guess you're just going to kind of play the cards you get dealt from an ownership perspective and go from there. Is there anyone, you mentioned they're all your top equity, so there's no one you're really going to eliminate right away?
Probably not. Let's see where ownership lands. Like, I do think Colin Morikawa probably is the most popular of the group. I think that a lot of people are going to talk themselves into him. I think he's safe. I think he's fine. I don't know if I'm specifically going to go in that direction, but I don't have a problem with anybody.
What I've done, Spence, is I've bet Colin Morikawa for a top 5 at plus 200. And I feel like, cool, that's me done for the week with him. Maybe if he gets crazy ownership, then I've got my top 5. If he cashes nicely, then we cash nicely. If he doesn't, then I think he could come in as one of the highest owned guys, Spencer, regardless of him not having really even won a big tournament recently. I mean, what was the biggest tournament he's won in the last while? I mean, he won the Zozo while everyone was sleeping. Like, we don't even really know if he can get across the line here in these big moments. And it's really become, I've made a formal announcement on Twitter that if I ever bet Colin Morikawa outright again, I've been ransomed. That is my ransom note. Like, come find me wherever I am. I'm not doing it. But top 5, I will, because I feel like you'll be around there, just not ever getting across the line.
My guess right now would be that he's going to be the highest owned player. If not, he's going to be within the top 5. There's a lot of other names that we can talk about. And, it's not just me. I think there's a lot of people who have a similar viewpoint, like people like Sharma this week. And I think Sharma's ownership is going to be very extensive down into that $6,000 range of people trying to fit him in. So that's a different discussion to be had. But I lean towards Morikawa probably being the projected number 1 player in ownership right now.
I think so too. And I would just like to rescind my comment about Jon Rahm and make it baseball. I think he'd be a great baseball player. What do you think Colin Morikawa would be great at, Spencer, in the Summer Olympics of 2024?
See, now I feel like I should, the correct answer for Scotty was the 3-on-3 basketball. I feel like Colin archery is actually the better outcome there.
Yes.
He's
like very, very, very precise. And I think potentially maybe even fencing, I think maybe just his lack of power, but precision and ability to wield the needle, I think would be a fun little one for Colin over there. So it's interesting. I mean, looking at these random, we got like a whole bunch of cycling. I don't know who the hell we're going to find here that get on a bicycle. Maybe I would nominate myself, but we'll see how it goes. So let's dive into the 9s as we go along down the board. Shane Lowry wants the ball to be rolled back because he bunted a driver into the front bunker on the same hole that Siwoo Kim hit a 3-iron into the hole for an ace. Now he wants the ball rolled back because he can't handle the pressure of a major championship. I don't even know how he won that Open Championship. It was, I guess, even before COVID, so there was fans and everything, but at a golf course that he played many, many times. What's your take on Shane Lowry this week, Spencer?
I don't necessarily have one. Like, I'm going to be lower than public consensus on him. For me, the real leverage in this range is going to be Viktor Hovland. Nobody's going to want to play Viktor Hovland with the form that he's bringing to the mix right now. But I've made this argument multiple times, even over the last couple weeks from Action Network shows that I've done. Look at the PGA Championship that he came 3rd place in. He drifted out to 50-1 in that market. We're seeing very similar drift this week where he's up to 35-1 at a lot of these shops. He ranks 6th in my model when faced with similar total driving courses, 2nd for weighted strokes gained total. He was 4th on similar putting surfaces. The one downside for him, and this has been the mistake just over and over again with his game, is around the green, but you got a lot of rough here around the surface. You have water that's surrounding these green complexes. GIR percentage is going to be a massive outlook that you need to have. Anytime that you can accentuate ball striking, you can shrink the inability that he has to scramble from around the green. I'm going to take a chance with him in GPP contest. I'm going to bet him at 35-1. I thought there were specific pockets that we had on the betting board, and I'll just go to the betting board here, where there were certain names. Like if you want to look at the top, it's Rahm, Xander, Scotty. Two of those guys are priced like the elite players. Rahm is 3 times the price. Take Hovland in this section. There's a lot of players there of like the Fleetwoods and all those names that are 20-1. Hovland drifts out to 35. So betting is all about value. It's always trying to pick and choose your spots here. You're not going to always get it correct with it, but anytime I can get a drift on a price that is just substantial compared to where my model thinks it should be from a course specific nature, doesn't mean that Hovland's not going to continue this bad form that he's put together, but really dive into the data. You're going to find a lot of good with it. The ball striking is not as bad as the results look. It's this short game of his that's gone in the wrong direction, and the positive nature that he has and the positive trajectory he has in my sheet for similar green complexes with the putter, and then the removal that I have in strokes gained around the green, there's a high-end outlook here for Hovland to where the floor is low. I'm not looking to play him in cash. I'm not necessarily looking to put him in a matchup. You want to bet some of these high-end markets like a top 5 to win a tournament, GPP contests that are like large field. I think he fits there really well.
I think you're right. I love that, Spence, because I was chatting to Kenny earlier about it, and it's like, out of all these guys in the 9K range, there's no doubt he is the most talented. But he's priced amongst these duds, like Lowry, Fleetwood, Neiman. None of these guys really getting it done in the big tournaments. And now we get him priced over here. So if he just doesn't chip himself out of this tournament, and the guys are saying this course is kind of playing soft, I know he's, like you've mentioned, he's a great total driver of the golf ball when it comes to accuracy and distance. Great long iron player. Can putt lights out. If the green regulation rates this week are kind of higher than we expect, that puts him right in the right boat, and I think that's something that we can consider, and I'll definitely be looking to roster him in some instances too.
I feel like I know what sport he should be, by the way.
Ooh. Let me guess. I've got mine sorted alphabetically. How do you have yours sorted?
To be honest with you, I found a different link than the one you sent me. I don't know that I have all the sports actually in front of me right now. I guess alphabetically is how they have it put together.
Okay. I'm going to say, I think Hovland would be a great surfer.
That's the answer I was going to give. Hovland feels like the kind of guy that would go want to smoke pot, go out there, ride the wave, and then you ask him how he did, and he gives you the most insane answer you've ever heard before that either makes the most sense of an answer that's ever been given, or something that just makes absolutely no sense at the end of the day.
Start speaking about the fish he saw while he was going under the waves out to the back line and just kind of figuring out what's going on there. I love it. Yeah. So that's a unanimous thing. By the way, the chat, you guys were rocking up with great suggestions for the guys we are nominating. So hit us up with Viktor Hovland's thing. I'd also like to hear Shane Lowry. I know that Shane Lowry's probably worst sport would probably be like equestrian or canoeing. If I were to pick a worse sport for Shane Lowry, I think his best sport would likely be like shooting. Just a big old, put him with a shotgun in his shoulder and just let him fire away, or things like that. Oh, there is weightlifting. There's weightlifting over there. So that would be Jon Rahm's, but I did change it to baseball. I'm all over Jon Rahm's stuff. Spence, what would Shane Lowry do in this 2024 Paris Olympics?
You can tell me if I'm wrong on this one. You have more knowledge on this specific topic than I would, but Lowry's another one of those guys that feels like he has lower body strength. I don't know if he has the conditioning to be able to keep the stamina up, but he feels like somebody that if you put him in some sort of a cycling thing, that he could find success. Like maybe it's, I don't know. I mean, I see so many different cycling sports that I don't really know the difference of what they are. Like cycling road would be my guess with it.
Yeah, he's a big boy. I think on the flats, he could potentially, be a good lead out guy. Aerodynamically, I know him and I are both kind of challenged in that department, but if it was a short distance, potentially, I think he could do it.
Maybe rugby then, just because of his bigger size.
Yes. I love that. And by the way, shout out to the Blitzbocker, bronze in the sevens. So they won bronze in the sevens, and the Frenchies, the filthy Frenchies, won gold there. But Spencer, let's do a little side tangent here and talk about the fact that this Olympics is in France. And we've got Mathieu Pavon over here at $8,000 in the 8K range. And then we've got Victor Perez as well playing. How do you feel the French home Olympics will impact these two golfers and just the other golfers playing this week?
Matchup wise, and this is a theory, this isn't something that you can put, a data intensive outlook towards with it. I actually think that those two names in particular are interesting matchup bets because you're going to have, that's a really good answer.
Shot put.
Yeah. I think that's part of the problem with the list that I have right now. I just have such a base. I have track and field in front of me. So I don't have every single sport of what track and field possesses. And then you hear shot put and it's like, oh yeah, that's great.
Yeah. The chat is you know what? We are done. We'll like just suggest guys' names. You guys bring the heat in the chat because you guys are absolutely rocking it. Back to your regular paid French programming. Salut.
I do think matchup bets for them, they're going to be very motivated. That's obviously speculation at the end of the day. I'm trying to figure out a way to get exposure, and specifically to Perez, I bet him at 110-1. I don't love the matchup that I ended up having with Perez. Like in an ideal world, and maybe we can find it somewhere, I would love him against Thorbjorn Olesen. I would love him against, there's 5 or 6 names down in that range. The person that I took him against, which you can find it over in the Rotoballer article that I write tomorrow, be a little spoiler. I usually give it out on the show. It hasn't been winning lately. So I think we're going to get the karma back in a positive direction here. We'll switch this up a little bit, but don't love the person I took him against because I do like him this week, but that's something that I would actively be searching for is what matchups can I find with Perez or even Pavon included here? Because
these guys will be digging deep all 4 days. It is a no-cut event. So, regardless of a bad round one, they'll be trying to dig deep. I'm right there with you, Spencer. I really think that's a great suggestion. And I'll give away my model because I know the answer to this question. And just for the halfway show, those of you that are watching in the chat on YouTube, we're going to take those suggestions there or Twitter, wherever you may be watching. I know what Spencer's answer will be for what sport he would be best in for the Summer Olympics. I'm pretty sure I do.
Yeah.
So drop it in the chat. The first correct answer will get my model DM to them directly if you guys aren't already part of the stuff. If you are a Rotoballer subscriber, we'll figure out, maybe we'll get you some merch or something figured out there. But Spencer Aguiar joins the 2024 Paris Olympics. What is his chosen, preferred, desired sport that he has done phenomenal things in as a amateur/junior growing up? Kevin says fencing. I don't think. Also, someone on Twitter was mentioning, what is the average inheritance of the fencing team? I would love to know what the average inheritance of the fencing team would be at these situations. But it looks like it came in pretty quickly. We've got Ed with equestrian. Spencer does not ride horses. Side says it would be bowling. Rose says hockey. Jens says bowling. And Sweet Spot, congrats, my brother. I think it's going to be tennis. Spencer, is it tennis?
Tennis would be the sport because I have a background in it. If there was a secondary sport that I would put myself in, it would be boxing.
Ooh, okay. But you would say you would be the most
it's not even close. Like I have a real background in tennis. I have no background in boxing, but
tell the people how good you were in Vegas as a tennis player growing up.
Well, there was a time
to brag. I'm letting you brag.
Many moons ago where I was the number 1 player in Nevada. I was one of the top players in my section, one of top players in the nation, but that's many moons ago before we got into sports betting and poker and all those things taking over my life.
Hell yes, dude. That's so incredible. And I too played tennis growing up as a kid, all the way through high school. In fact, I even had a serve with one of my friends. We passed away in a car accident when we were like, whatever, super young. It's all good. Called the Diablo. So in doubles, whenever we were like super behind or super ahead in the match, like when it was pretty much over, we'd look at each other and say, it's time for the Diablo. And we just put our tennis racket on the floor, bounce the ball off the strings, pick the tennis racket up, and then hit it in. Like we didn't even toss it. We just bounced it off the strings, and it would always one way or another, just get a good laugh out of everyone. So I just thought I'd share that side of things. It was fun playing tennis a lot. And I've tried to play some tennis recently, Spencer, and I cannot hit a double-handed backhand anymore. It's completely left my entire ability. So it's down to golf and riding a bicycle nowadays. So my sports are getting dwindled down.
With age and lack of reps, things go in the wrong direction with it. To answer the question, though, I am a righty, not a lefty.
A righty, not... Oh, who was asking?
Jens.
Jens was asking if yeah. And Sweet Spot saying, can you call yourself a true fan of Rotoballer PGA if you don't remember Spencer speaking about tennis 5 to 7 weeks ago? Just kidding, but seriously. Yes, I agree, dude. I just know I've chatted to Spencer about tennis in the past, but back to our French programming. Salut, ça va? Let's get into the 8s here, Spence. We're in the 8K range over here. It's kind of really piquing your interest. I'm a big fan of Benny On. And if we're going to kind of draw some comps to TPC Sawgrass, to a little bit of RBC Heritage Harbour Town, Wyndham Clark kind of sucked it up at the Open Championship. And I keep going back to this guy. I feel like after you've nailed him twice or so, I'm kind of going back for Spencer sloppy seconds and thirds here. But hey, I think there's a chance at 110 to 1 with 3 places at Bet365. I'm in on Wyndham Clark, folks. Like, he's 2 top 10 finishes prior to the Open Championship. The putter's starting to find its way again. I kind of like him around this kind of venue. Thoughts?
I don't mind Wyndham Clark. I know we've had a lot of discussions about him. Some of them have been better than others, but we talk all the time about when negative stigmas get attached to players. And for better or worse here, Clark has gotten a negative stigma attached from him, partially because of his game being in the wrong spot. A lot of this answer coming, though, from it should be Bryson here. It should be this player. It should be that player. Nobody's giving Clark credit for actually being on this team. He's inside of the top 16 of my model, which may not sound like an overly enticing return, but when you're looking at a golfer that I think he's going to be, where do you think the ownership's going to land for him? Like 6-7%?
Yeah, somewhere in, definitely not more than 10%. People hate him. Like, they hate to play him. They hate him. He doesn't deserve to be here. Yet, in the 4 years prior to the, since the last Olympics, in the last 2 years, he's won 3 times. Bryson's also won 3 times, in that span. So 2 of them on live, like I guess one of them was, the PGA champ or the Open, the US Open. They both won the US Open. So they both have that US Open name to their, am I right? Yeah, it's the US Open. And I don't know, man. Let's chat about Bryson. I put him in our thumbnail here. I thought that was quite a funny little Rocket Mortgage Photoshop there. But what are your thoughts about like the selection criteria for this year's Olympics?
It is what it is at the end of the day. Everybody that went over to live knew what they were signing up for at the end of the day with it. It's unfortunate. Golf's going to be in a better spot where players can get into the same tournaments together, and we don't have this parting system of one side or the other. Here's what's interesting, and I don't know the answer to this, and maybe you can tell me your thoughts. Have you looked at what comes from a victory at the Olympics?
Yes. You get into the Players' Championship?
Yes, exactly.
You also get into the Century if you are a PGA Tour professional at that point in time.
There's a criteria there that'll take you out, but I did not see the asterisk underneath the Players' Championship. So that would be a unique outlook to see Rahm in that tournament if he's able to get himself there. I don't know, or whoever it ends up being. Any of these live golfers that have the ability to get themselves there. I think to answer your question, Clark is, though, going to give you some leverage. Thomas Dietrich is a nice leverage option early in the week for me. A lot of good course history at this venue. I saw this question. I don't know who asked it earlier about what are you doing about course history. It is very lightly weighed in my model. I don't want to go over the top with something like that. If you look at the last 2 years, it got moved to later in the year, and you got this spike from a lot of the other iterations of the course where distance became more prevalent. Now, all of a sudden, I think we're going to move back to accuracy being a little bit more relevant for this course. So, like, the change of time of when that tournament is played really has me wanting to underweigh the category. I put it to 10%. I went through for all the golfers that didn't have history and kind of like reprojected what their average finish is just on any generic course, just to get a better understanding. There's pros and cons of going in that route. I just didn't want to have a 0 for those totals. Not going to be weighing it overly heavily in my model. And then for a high-end name that's going to carry more ownership, I do like Sepp Straka this week. I tried to figure out a way to get exposure to Straka in the outright market. I didn't eventually get there. I took a different approach with my card. Didn't necessarily think that he was going to win the tournament, which famous last words for me. I seem to do this every single week for the player that did not make my card that came very close and then ends up winning the tournament like Vegas or Xander or Bobby Mack, Davis Thompson. Like we're on quite the streak right now with that, Byron. But
Spencer, you've got like 4 silver medals in the last little while, my friend.
Yeah, and if you actually look at the names I bet, I think it's like 6 second-place finishes in 8 weeks. It's kind of been how close can we come to victory without actually getting across the finish line in any of these contests?
Dude, it's been a year like that. I don't know. Like Joe Idoni's been, prior to his last two dubs, just second place forever. I've had a million second places. It's ridiculous stuff. So I don't know what it is about this year, but just trying to find the winner has been a nightmare. I know T-Dak in the chat, by the way, been on Fuego and a few other guys that we are friends with there on Twitter that have been firing up, including old Jim Cummings, who's just been doing his thing. So shout out to him because I know he missed me being on Kenny's show with that one. So any other names here in the 8th, Spence? I know Hideki Matsuyama is likely going to pop up there with some, incredible long iron play, total driving, all that stuff, but I'm a little concerned about his ability to get the putts in the hole at a venue like this.
The worst values for me in this range were Minwoo Lee and Hideki Matsuyama. Minwoo was the worst value that I had.
Yes.
I think taking Minwoo on in matchups is kind of the route that I am looking to go there. There's going to be, to me, I'm very different than public consensus in a lot of spots. The $8,000 range isn't quite where that consensus comes into play. Dietrich and Clark, yes, I think I'm going to be different there. We're going to have to see where ownership lands with Connors and Fitzpatrick. Maybe Fitzpatrick gets me a little different, but do you want to have the Jason Day conversation? Like my model kind of liked him this week. And like, as much as we joke about me liking Jason Day every week, that is Rhythm Clark is that person now more than Jason Day. I don't really play Jason Day and feel like on the times where I have liked him recently, he's been better than not. Don't know what the actual upside is, but I think it's a decent price with like, where do you think the ownership lands? Probably like very minimal, right?
Minimal amongst Straka, Hideki, Connors. I feel like not more than double digits. I don't think, because
I think it'll be single digits.
If I'm Australia, I don't think I'm ever getting a medal from him this week. I just don't see him finishing top 3, whereas I do see Minwoo finishing top 3 on both sides of the leaderboard, if that makes any sense. That's the thing about this tournament is like for Seabez, let's dive into the 7J with Bezzy, because when I guess they're not, if the Netherlands were to select anybody for the tournament, they wouldn't select anybody, and they still didn't because they never sent their guys through. But for Bezzy, like, the Olympics is probably I'm probably going to eat my words, but one of the last tournaments you want him to be playing in, because it's upside or bust at the Olympics I know this is a betting show and a DFS show where this, top 10 still works, which is fine. But from a South African perspective, I'm way more enticed by EVR. I think his upside, his volatility is much better than Bezzy's, where Bezzy's going to just float inside the top 30. He's going to be in the top half of this field again, like he normally is. It's just, I don't see the upside. So in the 7K range, Spencer, where would you be looking to hunt some guys?
I like Bezaden Hout. I just want that to be on record. It's an unfair answer to be given because you just said this yourself. Like, I'm going to repeat your words back to you. I think for safety, Bezaden Hout makes a lot more sense than Van Rooyen if you're just talking specifically matchups here. I think you agree with that. Maybe I'm wrong.
Oh, 1000%.
Okay.
Yeah, Bezzy is so safe, unless he's injured, which I don't even know.
I guess just from a course-specific outlook from Bezaden Hout, you really can't find a better course for him. We can talk about his inability to create distance off the tee over and over again on this show, but a lot of the metrics for how it fits this specific venue, to me, gives him a little bit more upside. Like I talked about Straka being a name that was very close for me. I didn't get to Bezadenhout because like if you don't win golf tournaments, you never find yourself in contention. I don't know if I want to bet you to win the gold medal at the Olympics. I also think though, like if there was an ability to like bet him in, if you had each way out to the max with it, which there are sites that are doing that, like there's a real potential to bet Bezaden out with it each way 10 places or something. Like to me, that is probably one of the better values. I had him. He was a positive climber for me for upside, which is a very loose term to be given there. It's not taking actual long-term outputs. It's taking long-term projections from a course-specific outlook. But he was a climber for me. And normally when you can find a golfer who's a climber for a specific course, it's a pretty good outlook. I don't know if he's going to win, but at the price tag, intriguing. Don't know what the ownership's going to be. That might be the other conversation. Because he might end up becoming very popular for a lot of the reasons I just mentioned right now. I wouldn't be shocked if Bezadenhout found himself in a way where, I mean, he could be 20-something%, I guess. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but yeah, I don't know.
I mean, I would love that because I feel like his injury history is a little iffy right now. I don't know why he withdrew from that previous tournament a few weeks ago. I guess it's probably fixed now, but maybe it was in anticipation of the Olympics, which I've seen, his Instagram, he's very proud. And I think that's the majority of this week is like, who's going to really channel that emotion of their country? I mean, these guys step up in majors, and I know there's a specific skill set that is required at these majors, but in the Olympics, Spencer, do you think it's a mental capacity needed as well?
Yeah. I mean, that's at the end of the day,
what you can't really model it, but
no, I mean, and it's something that's like, it's the reason why, while my numbers liked him, I didn't bet Bezadenhout to win.
Right.
Like there's something to be said about that the numbers can show something, but if it's not in a territory where there's such amount of value there that I feel comfortable betting it, like he's a safer matchup target at the end of the day. And he's a good cash game play. Like there's a lot of areas where I'm going to look, which is maybe an unfair, it's not even, that's an argument, but it's like an unfair rebuttal to what you've said, because you've also given a very similar answer here. And if we're talking GPP contest at a popular Bezadenhout, there might be a different answer to be given there, but I think he's safe. I think that the statistical profile looks really good. I think for what you actually need from him, if the ownership stays low enough, which I don't think it will, you don't necessarily need the victory. Like a 9th place finish would work just well enough, but I think there's other names that you can consider in the $7,000 section. Like I'm going to be out on Højgaard. I'm going to be out on Thorbjorn Olesen. I think Answer's fine. I think Monacero is fine.
Mm-hmm.
I like Victor Perez a lot from a lot of the reasons that we've already talked about. I'm going to have matchups with him. I have the outright ticket. There's a lot of interesting things from Perez though.
It's saying Seabears would be great at trampoline. Thoughts? Dude, you know what I know this is kind of bad, but I was, been watching House of the Dragon, and they like, spoiler alert, there's like parts where they like have these rat catchers in King's Landing hunting down the rats, and they like murder them all. But Spezzy like surviving the rat poison as a youngster, I think he would have survived, the rat catchers getting massacred at King's Landing as well. But that's a totally different, that's like the prehistoric Olympics back in when there were dragons and stuff still. But Spence, what would sea bears be best in the Olympics if it weren't trampoline?
What do you think is the safest sport? Like, what do you think is the sport where somebody can just play things safe? And
I would say
like equestrian, maybe. Like,
yeah, riding a horse would for sure be in the
just don't hit certain marks and make sure to just kind of just do what you need to do.
Yeah, I think I think you're right. I think equestrian is exactly what Bezzy would do. Or lacrosse. I guess lacrosse is kind of dangerous on a horse. You don't want to fall off a horse. Trampolining seems, you can break your neck quite easily on trampoline.
Synchronized diving from Jens is a very good answer.
Yeah, synchronized diving. Who would Bezzy's synchronized diving partner be?
You have to find somebody who has a similar thing where you're just both trying to do what the other person is doing at the end of the day.
Artistic swimming also suggested. I guess, yeah, that's it. I think a swimming pool, under the water swimming pool stuff for bears. Absolutely. So let's take a look here. Is there another option for Bezzy's synchronized diving partner?
I'm just going, I don't know if this is the right answer, but I feel like Fabrizio, Zanotti, and Bezadenhout just sounds like a synchronized diving team.
Bezzani, like Bezzani. I think it would be great. I love it. Let's go. The Zanotti Bezzy. I think that's a great synchronized diving. Ooh, Curly saying walking, like speed walking.
Yeah.
I think I can totally see Bezzy doing the speed walking thing as well. So that's a great one, Curly. Great one. Yeah, no, the swimming and the walking. It's like all the rehab things, that you do after you get injured. So awesome stuff in the chat here, as always. All right, boys and girls, let's dive into the sixes. Yeah. By the way, I've got, like I mentioned, just to run that back, I've got outrights on both Frenchmen. Just out of it's like 110 to 1 and 140 to 1 plays, like with 3 places each. I think one of these guys lands up on the podium potentially. Why not? I feel like you're barely wasting any equity in that department. I feel like it's totally fine. I also love myself some Nick Taylor, and I think he's the perfect option for Canada to kind of, like where Mackenzie Hughes wouldn't be the best option or Corey Connors, because these guys just don't get across the finish line, whereas Taylor, when he finds himself playing badly, he plays terribly. But when he's playing well, he's at the top of the leaderboard and he wins these tournaments, man.
Taylor, for me, would probably be one of those directions that if you want to talk about a boom or bust sort of play, that I don't know what his ownership is going to be at the end of the day, but positive trajectory marks for upside. The safety marks leave a lot to be desired. It's kind of what you're looking for when you're trying to push yourself up a leaderboard. We've seen it before from him too. He has gone toe to toe in a lot of spots with elite golfers and beaten them in spots too. Like he's been good when he's good.
Yeah, because you think about him fending off Charlie Hoffman in the playoff, but he had to do what he had to do to get into the playoff by holding off Sam Burns and Scotty Scheffler. Like those names. He's hung around Scotty Scheffler at that Waste Management a few times, so I think he's definitely in the mix. And I think like Jens is saying archery for Nick Taylor. I'm kind of curious because what would be like the most upside sport that you could kind of find in the Summer Olympics? I feel like diving, where or skateboarding, where you can totally just out of nowhere pull off like a ridiculous like 720 out of like minimal up, ramping or whatever. But I have no idea. Also, Spence, did you hear that the surfing is taking place like all the way into Yeedy? Yeah. Caitlin and I were laughing about that last night. The fact that like all these guys get to go to the opening ceremonies, the surfers get shipped off into the middle of the ocean somewhere, millions and millions of miles away. But I thought, I don't know, I'm just in love with the Olympics this week. So apologies if we're kind of derailing this conversation a lot. But if you want some good quality stuff, go check out Preferred Lines with Spencer and Joe.
I think skateboarding is a good one, by the way. I watched the men's and women's events for that, and it's one of those things where you see some people that for their best trick, they just go zeros across the board and they don't medal, and then you randomly get somebody that puts together 3 pristine tricks and they find themselves on the podium, and it's kind of the outlook that Nick Taylor is going to try to take this week.
Yes, he could leave in a full body cast, or he could leave with a gold medal. Like that's Nick Taylor for you in the skateboarding world. Okie dokes, boys. Spencer, in the sixes, outside of the Sharma character, Shubhankar Sharma, a content creator's nightmare, if you aren't familiar with the name. $6,400, playing some solid golf.
Sharma's going to be so popular. He's going
to be the highest owned guy in the 6K range, undoubtedly.
Yeah.
So obviously we won't go there. Where else are we going?
I kind of like, I faded him last week. I kind of like Emiliano Grillo for this spot. I know some of the recent metrics are going to leave a lot to be desired, but a couple made cuts in a row. Last week, I thought he performed, and the 3M is a venue for him that he's a top 10 machine, and he faltered in spots to not necessarily give you that great of a result, but I also thought the statistics across the board were a little bit better than I thought they were going to be. Now, all of a sudden, he jumps into a legitimate top 25 sort of play for me here. So I liked Grillo. I talked about Montecero at 7,000. I do think he has playability. If you want to just go like gross down the board and take a shot, I go back to Zanotti. My model likes Zanotti this week.
What's his deal? Tell the people. I have yet to put my model together, so I'm kind of just riding your tail, coach. Yeah, what's Zanotti's skill sets? Why is he popping for you?
I mean, limited data, which is going to be part of the problem, but 13th in my model for weighted total driving. That includes top 10 marks for driving accuracy and also fairways gained when I put a penalizing miss that came into play there. Good scrambler of the ball. Fine in a lot of the scoring categories from what I was looking for. The around the green play is great, and I've talked about a little bit of the diminishing qualities from around the green play, so I guess he loses some of that based off of that answer, but he feels like one of those like prototypical fits where he can find enough fairways, he works himself into the first page of the leaderboard, and you stick there long enough, and all of a sudden you get a bronze medal out of it, or you have a chance for a bronze medal.
Yeah, that would be so awesome, dude. Because this Olympics, like if you think about the last three or the last two Olympics, especially last year's, I mean, Rory Sabatini and CT Pan, like what on earth? Who expected that to ever happen? So, Spence, do you think this kind of venue potentially separates the cream from the milk, or the cream from the cookies, or however you want to say that? But with the long iron demands this week.
I mean, that's always usually what ends up transpiring in these spots, but there's so much. To me, water is the great equalizer. And anytime that you have a large amount of water that comes into play, and maybe that's one of the reasons why I like Grillo so much. You think of last week, a lot of water. You think of Florida courses. This is kind of one of those, it mimics Florida venues for me where you're going to have to keep your ball dry. So like players that can go that route have the ability to work themselves up the leaderboard. I keep using that terminology, but that's what you're going to need here. If you're not one of the elite players at the end of the day, you're going to have to keep yourself in contention. You're going to not have to make mistakes, and you're going to have to find the ability to make enough birdies in spots that you keep yourself in a position to where on Sunday, when push comes to shove with 11 holes to play, you're within 2 or 3 shots of the lead. And then, you push all the chips in and figure out where everything lands with it.
Yeah. And that's just it, Spence, is once we get these ownership numbers, I think this week in particular, you got to play that game, at the top of the board in particular, but at the bottom to a decent degree as well. I will also mention we got Ace Ventura, shout out here from TDAC, saying 7 top 25 in his last 10 KFT starts. So he's playing some solid golf. That's the thing. The bottom of this range has got Corn Ferry Tour players. Like that's what we're dealing with here, and that's what makes these Scotty Scheffler lineups and things that difficult to kind of roster. So we'll see how he does. To answer Edward's question about Hillier, I mean, he's been showing some nice stuff. So I don't. Do you see that continuing, Spence? Or
I liked him. He's another name that I would throw out there. Like I don't see a massive difference, and this is, I guess, meant to be a compliment between him and CT Pan. I think they're very similar, but Pan is going to carry more ownership than Hillier. So
yeah,
I think he's a nice little leverage spot to consider.
Yeah. And my final guy in the bottom range is going to be Rafael Campos. If you're looking for a ball striker, he's your guy. And we'll worry about whatever happens on and around the greens for a 6K golfer when and if that does happen. Do you have a take on old Campo?
Not really. I think the upside numbers make sense for what you're talking about. He climbs in upside. He shrinks for safety. I don't know if he gets up to enough of the upside of what I'm looking for. Like I would almost rather go to Echeverria. I would rather go to, I mean, I guess Zanotti is the name I keep going to. Like there are options in there, but if we're forced to play somebody at 6,200 or less, he's probably one of the 2, 3, 4 options that I'm most inclined to put into a lineup.
Yeah. And when it comes to like building these lineups, Spence, like what are you most inclined, like what kind of contests are you kind of hunting down this week? I'm I think I'm going to have to lean into the single entries again, especially when these fields get smaller, especially when you want to play Scotty or when you don't want to play Scotty. I've typically left him out of my single entry, 3 entry lineups because, you're always looking for the other 5 combinations to put alongside the $12,500 golfer that Scotty Scheffler is. And Xander at 11.6, I guess, is a little less likely. But thoughts on contest selection in a 60-man field that's so top-heavy with a no-cut event?
It's probably just the same answer I would always give, Byron, where just be cognizant at the end of the day of where your ownership is landing for specific contests and understand from the very beginning of this that it's a 60-man field. So ownership across the board is going to look a little bit higher than you normally have. It's the same discussion that always comes into play for outright betting. It's, people see these boards and go, oh my God, this is everybody's sub 10-1. Well, if you actually look, there's less hold percentage in this tournament than you get during most weeks. It's actually technically a better outright betting board than normal. It's just everybody's so used to names drifting down, but you're not going to get that when you get this watered down field, the very bottom of the board. There's going to be no playability on a lot of these guys, but I kind of gave this answer at the beginning, at least for myself, whether it ends up being right or wrong. I seem to have differing viewpoints in a lot of spots than the general public. There are some names that I certainly like as much or more than the public that are going to be popular, but there's enough ability for me to look at a Viktor Hovland as just one example there and say, okay, Hovland's going to probably be sub 10%. In my opinion, nobody's going to play him. I can find a lot of ways to get unique and different to where everybody's going to go and play the same guy at 35%. And I can kind of find 3 or 4 names that I prefer more at a third of the ownership. So that's why I like this DFS contest, just because not every single week do you have differing viewpoints from the general public. There's going to always be overlying qualities and returns that are going to be similar. But when you get these like massive deviations from the public, and I feel like my model this week has some massive deviations, at least compared to where early ownership projections are right now, those are the weeks that are fun for me because I'm either coming in last or I'm coming in first. And we always talk about how top heavy the rake is in DFS. You need to always shoot for the moon in these contests. Yeah. I think that there's the big potential here to have a big payout. And we keep talking about these golfers. If you're not first, you're last type of deal. Well, it's kind of how I'm going to play it this week.
Let's go, dude. I love to hear that, Spence. And I think everyone should take a note out of Spence's book, my book, with that kind of stuff. If you go to the balls to the wall, but within reason, within methodology, within, you're not going to just play a guy different because he's different. You want to play a guy because your numbers say he's a good play, but it's different to the rest of the world. So I think that's what's going on there. Yeah.
It's the Jon Rahm answer. I mean, I know he got on the wrong end of the draw, but we had the same argument with Jon Rahm at the Open Championship. It's the public consensus is much lower on Jon Rahm. We have Jon Rahm as top 10 projected players in our model. There's a very small divergence between the actual price that he was in our model, and there was an ability to create massive leverage based off of where the ownership was with the general public. And that's always where I'm trying to find my leverage. Like, leverage is such, I said this with Joe Idoni, leverage is such an overused term in the space right now. People get way too carried away because they believe they're creating leverage in a spot where you're not actually creating leverage because you think you're getting different, and you are getting different. Like, don't mistake that. Different is not always good though in these spots. You still want to put together as optimal of a build as you can throw in there. Game selection is going to deviate from that a little bit depending on how different you need to get. But I kind of have given this answer quite a few times. You never need to get as different as you actually believe you do in a lot of these spots. Leverage has become too overblown, and this is coming from a person that for 6 years, all I talked about was leverage. We've gone too far in the other direction with leverage, in my opinion now.
Yeah, because sometimes you just play a cash game lineup that has one sneaky under the radar guy, and that would have typically almost been fine, in some GPPs, sometimes. So it's kind of a weird way to look at it, but play the best plays first and then see how chalky that lineup turns out to be, then kind of go from there. Maybe that's a nice way to kind of go about it. But Spencer, I want to chat to you one thing about some outright betting here. And I know Baroff mentioned to me on X about, I mentioned today that in the Olympics this week, we've got the men in golf and the women playing golf. And 3 golfers in those 2 events are unbettable. And I say unbettable at plus 550, plus 400, plus 550, Nelly, Xander, and Scotty, if you're looking to return 6x or 7x on your bets. Now, Scotty has messed up that kind of a world because I ran some numbers and looked since 2023. And if you've bet every single golfer sub 7-1, you would have returned $230 or $240 if you're trying to win 100 every time you bet. Now, that can go wrong very quickly if you have 1 or 2 bad months, right? Because you are laying so much equity into those bets. Yet so far in the last two years, it's been Jon Rahm. And what I noticed is they were clumped in like 2s. These guys that are really, really supremely good go on these runs where they just kind of catch incredible form. So I'm kind of curious on your take. One, we got 2 guys in the field for the first time since 2023 that are both sub 6 or sub 7. And 2, how do you approach weeks like this when odds are so short?
I made this argument in Discord, inside the Rotoballer Discord today. And it's one of those things, Byron, where, look, I've been very forward and forthcoming that I kind of went for better or worse, which is for better on this answer, for 7 years in this space without really having a extremely poor run. Like I've told you this a million times off air. I ran so far above expected value in a lot of these spots that in the last 2 months, things have hit a little bit in the other direction to where I think I've run as poorly as I've ever run. I think you see that with the returns right now with it, but I think a couple things can be said of that. One, you run badly, you have some bad results, things are going to enter the mix and you're not going to do as well. I think the other thing that has happened though is, and this is kind of for me more of how I want to answer this question, I have found the betting market to be much more sophisticated than it was 2 years ago. The prime example of those situations, and we'll talk about in-tournament betting for a second. It used to be such a simple game that you could build a model, and I've talked about this a million times on shows, where Doug Gim last week has a round 1 that he massively underachieves. He should be inside the top 10 of my model. He finishes in 61st place on day 1. He is the prime climber in my sheet. And books were really inconsistent with the matchups that they would give you. They would give you Doug Gim versus a golfer that should not have been his opponent, a golfer that is an obvious fade candidate, and a matchup to where I'm hitting over 60% through 1,200 plays because you're giving me the wrong end of what a matchup should be in a lot of those spots. There were fade candidates where the market moved too far in one direction, whether that's good or bad, and there was a way to either back that player or take them on based off of that answer. We don't have that anymore. You can see it with the in-tournament bets. Players now, Emiliano Grillo and Taylor Moore are the 2 prime examples of this last week. I know both of them played fine, and they continued it the entire week, but you got the same return every single night that no matter who, if it was Mac Meisner, if it was Harry Hall, if it was Max Grazerman, all these guys continue to be massive favorites over that group because the sportsbooks have gotten more intelligent to understand these are potential fade candidates based off of the way they're playing. They're overachieving their ball striking. They're overachieving their baseline putting, and they're putting together results that are not sustainable. So that is in one front made the matchups much more challenging. When we talk about outright betting now, they've also gotten savvier in spots of finding these situations to where they mask and they skew prices. Now, they made a mistake at the Open Championship, which is where my biggest gripe on myself is. Xander at 15-1 was one of the best values on the board. Most of these majors, we've seen him at like 12-1 or sub 12-1 in a lot of these spots. And you see them just continuing to mask these guys that they think they have more upside potential than the general public tends to believe in these spots. And I guess for me to answer this question best, and I talked about this in Discord today, it's a long circle back to get to this.
Yeah.
I think that if you don't adapt, and somebody wrote this in the chat, if you don't adapt, you die. And
Yes.
there is this thing that has come into play where the markets are savvier now. So the prototypical way of how I would build a model of these are my outrights, these are my matchups, this is my value. I want 3%. It's very easy to find. It's not as easy to find now. You're going to have to find a way to get unique and different with it. So one of the things that I have started implementing this week, which is a much more, I've always been the man from the beginning, 7 to 8 units is what I'm betting to win. I diversified my portfolio much differently this week to where in an ideal world for me, and I know this is a long answer, I will wrap this up in the next
No,
minute.
it's a very important question, which I'm thinking you're nailing. So
when you look at outright bets, for me, and when I was my best, there are people out there, whether this is a pro or a con or a good or a bad thing, that give 14 to 20 names. I don't think that's a good thing, but you can give 14 names on a card, and if one of those names comes in, that's great. For me, specifically for units that I'm trying to get down, when I had my most success in betting, it's when I was putting a half unit in play. Try to bet a half unit to win 7 units and figure out how quickly. Put a half unit on Jon Rahm this week at 11 to 1. You don't even get to the output that you need to get to. So I think because the market has gotten savvier at this point, I am going to try to deviate away from that. Not that I was ever a set amount, Byron. Like, as you know, it's 7 to 12, like depending on what my edge is. But I diversified my portfolio much differently this week. Like, I bet Jon Rahm to win a minuscule amount compared to what I normally would do in these spots because one, I had an edge. I didn't want to put down, it wasn't a large enough edge for me to try to win 7 or 8 units, but it was a large enough edge to where I still had a favorite at the top of the board. It let me bet him in a possibility to where if he wins, it will be a nice outcome. It will be a profitable week from it. There are some good that's going to come into play, but that is my big change that I'm making this week. And I'm not telling everybody that that's how they should do it or that's the most optimal way to do it. There are people that are savvier in outright betting than others. There are some that can play it more aggressively. Outright King is like the prime example of that for me. There's a lot of people like Outright King has much more exposure on his outright card than I would feel comfortable doing. He also hits them at a larger rate than I would hit them if I was doing the same thing. Like I know where my bread and butter market is at the end of the day. And if for me, it's not the outright market and it never has been, I will pick and choose my opportunities, diversify the win totals to a different perspective. And that's a lot different of an answer than I've ever given in 7 years, but it goes back, adapt or die. And I feel like I am starting to drown and die in some of these bets. And so the ability to adapt here gives me the potential to now put these outright cards more in the structure how I would want it to be.
Yeah. I think that's spot on, Spence. And I mentioned that in my replies is you have to change because the betting odds change and the books change and what you're looking to put down and how the edges are different now. This year I've hit 3 40 to 1 plus tickets. 2 of them are outrights. One of them is a Xander top 10 in all 4 majors. Like I've figured out that my best place is to do the placements. Like that's my jam. So I've reduced my $100 betting card for breaking 100 from $20 outrights to 10 because I'm just sick and tired of just having a decent week in the placement markets and profiting $15, but still losing money because I'm losing $20 in the outright world. You know, I didn't want that anymore. And I'm even doing it now with $10 using each ways in that $10, you know, so that when my guys are finishing second, I'm still cashing that money in. So it's just weird ways to adapt. And I don't think there's a right way to do it. I think it's just the right way for you, the right way for your risk management, the right way for your bankroll to kind of go into it. So that was a question I wanted to ask a professional gambler about because I think it's important to understand that what was correct 2 years, 3 years ago isn't going to necessarily be the same this week.
It's poker. It's poker in a nutshell. The game adapted and grew so beyond from the days where I played professional poker with it. Like it's a completely different game now. Even when I was closing it, it was becoming a different game. It's like these ever-changing markets to where you have to have the ability to grow and to change what you're doing. And one of the things that comes into play for me is kind of the same answer that you just gave that I want to double down on. When I found myself having, I know a unit is not that much for outright tickets, but when I have a unit on outrights, they're not coming in And because of all this that I've talked about of the head-to-head market and the placements not having as large of an edge anymore, now all of a sudden I'm overweighted on outrights, which is where I never wanted to be. So that was one of the core reasons why I decided to make this change. Every tournament's going to be different. Every tournament is going to be a different structure. I might decide one week that Jon Rahm is the only name that I want to bet at 11-1, and I bet him for 0.6 of a unit, call it a day, move on, and let's, bet some in-tournament bets from there if that's what we want to do from an outright market. But that's the other thing too, Byron, that I want people to at least consider out there. And this is where my model has been really good, and I haven't found a way to actually utilize it correctly. On Saturday night, for 5 consecutive weeks, my model has had value on the person who's won the golf tournament. And only one time did I feel like I actually had maneuverability with my card to where I could make a bet. And that was Bobby Mack at the Scottish Open. I got him at 5.5-1. I found myself in the spot with Xander at the Open where I wanted to get a ticket on him at 3.5-1. I had to put such a risk to get back my initial exposure that it didn't feel like it was worth it. Same thing with Jonathan Vegas last week. Like, there's an ability to jump in and to find value. The clickbait and the headline will always be that I picked this name before the tournament at a price. There are opening points if you keep your card low enough in exposure, where I'm not saying like just keep it at a half unit and never add more. I'm just saying I want the ability to traverse a card on Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night. If I want on Saturday night to make a bomb wager on Jonathan Vegas, I want that to be in the arsenal and not to be in a spot where I'm at 1.5 units and I'm like, I have to put a unit on this to even break even now. And I'm not going to put more than a unit on this to try to win money. And now I've put myself in a spot where there's really, I don't want to call it a get out of jail card, but like, I don't have a get out of jail card. Yeah. I mean, like, it just becomes very difficult based off of that. So that would be the very long-winded answer of how I'm going to start approaching my outright card. It's much different than I think anybody's ever talked about in the space with it. I think we've gotten and some, like you said, Byron, some people do it better than others with it. But I know for me, it's not profitable right now. And 2 months is a long enough time. Like, we need to make a switch.
Yeah, I totally agree, dude. And I think almost like doing it live, would you almost suggest having a separate bankroll or a separate bet where you betting a live bet and at plus 350, plus 550, you're not necessarily returning the 10 or 7, the 7 to 12 that you will, but maybe just nullifying what you've invested, like kind of just breaking even by hitting the winner at a very small investment and exposure as the tournament goes along.
This is a much different conversation to be had, and this would probably be an hour podcast on its own. I'll tell you what I used to do, and we can at least go from there. And it's going to be a little bit different now, but I used to bet to win 7-12 pre-tournament. On Thursday and Friday night, I would bet to win 5. On Saturday and Sunday night, I would bet to win somewhere between 2 to 3.5. I mean, if you just want like some cookie cutter answer for that, that would be kind of where I'm at. I also think, though, it comes down to value. That is kind of the broader answer there. Like Jonathan Vegas at 60-1 on Thursday night might have more value to where you are still willing to put, a 1/10 of a unit on it. So I think it's bet specific with it. So I don't necessarily want to tie myself or back myself into a corner there because I think every opportunity is different there. But I think as a general rule of thumb, as the tournament goes on, in theory, your win total should marginally be shrinking.
That's kind of what I was thinking too. And it makes sense because it's more certain, or at least, there's less value or less optimism or upside in a person's odds. I don't know. I did not plan on asking all of these things, but it just kind of came to mind because we had a bit of time to kill over here because I never want to do a show without getting a little over the hour mark with you, Spence, because that's just our jam. And I've missed you because it's been 2 weeks without speaking to you. So anything else you want to chat to the people about?
No, like I said, I am very excited about this tournament. I think it's a good event from top to bottom. For DFS, I am always the person that says I'm out on no cut limited field events. Not going to necessarily be this week. I have enough spots where I feel like I'm going to be unique and different. Let's see where ownership lands. That can very quickly change. I didn't anticipate when I built my model today. And or I built it a couple weeks ago with Sharma, but I didn't expect when I actually posted it today with Sharma being as high as he was to look at ownership and see him be the projected highest owned player. And part of that's the Open Championship. Part of that is I think he's a good course fit. It's a lot of moving pieces. That's the one thing that I want everybody to keep in mind every event is when you go with these cookie cutter or black and white answers and you expect it to be one way, never quite necessarily goes in that direction. Like who could have seen Sharma being as popular as he was? So I think being fluid is always a good thing in betting. I think I talked for 20 minutes, Byron, about the ability to adapt. But the ability to adapt goes to any market that we want to talk about. It's not just outright betting. It's the ability to adapt when ownership changes, good or bad. It's the ability to adapt when you find value or the ability to fade somebody where you didn't think there was going to be. It's the ability where a sports book makes an incorrect price based off of a number that you could have never envisioned that golfer being priced against a certain player. And while the general public may like them, they're out of their price range of where they should be in that matchup. And all of a sudden you have value. Like I talked about this a couple weeks ago at the Open with Morikawa over DeChambeau. A little bit of a different spot because I knew the market would like DeChambeau. But when the market pushes him in the direction of a Morikawa, that is one of the safest golfers in my model. I always say I don't do star versus star battles. But if you want to give me a lower price by 40 points from what my model has, it's the ability to adapt and say, okay, there's value on this. Let's punch the ticket. So I just want everybody to keep that in mind. Adapting is a very good thing in life. It's a very good thing in this industry. And in order to weather these storms, bankroll management at the end of the day, you never want to have too much of a risk on the table. You always want to have the ability to where you are systematically, and I stress the term systematically approaching these cards in a very structured fashion. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint.
Amen, man. This is cool. This is awesome stuff. TDAC saying, it's just general concepts about betting that not a lot of people get to, and not a lot of people feel comfortable about chatting about because sometimes it's black and white, like you've mentioned. And I think being fluid within structure as well, like you can change how you bet as long as your bankroll management is gold, then you're good to go. So let's do it, man. Thank you, Spence, for such awesome information and feedback there on that last question I had there. The chat was firing. Hideki Matsuyama, PS360 36 says he's plus 3,700. So if you're in the mood for that, go for it. I don't know. I'm not a Hideki Matsuyama truther, so I won't be joining you there, my friend. But you did absolutely nail. What was it early in the freaking show? It was one of the best. Oh, Scotty Scheffler being the 3-on-3 basketballer for sure. That was probably the best comment of just solid, solid comments there. But go check out rotoball.com. Use code TOFF, code Maniac for your 10% off over there, or code Summer. I don't know if is it even Summer? It is. I don't know. Go use Summer, see what it gets you. I think it's 30% off still. I don't know. Maybe it's not. Use ours. And folks, it's the Summer Olympics, man. This happens 4 years apart every year. So enjoy every minute of it. Enjoy the golf. Enjoy watching the likes of Rory Sabatini win silver for Czechoslovakia when he spent 95% of his life in South Africa. So this is the joys that we get from these kind of events. So please enjoy every minute of it. Tell your friends, tell your family, hit the like button on the way out. And please, folks, we'll catch you guys next week. Peace.